How is virtual learning in North Carolina supposed to work when 197,000 households with students do not even have access to the internet? COVID-19 reveals a digital divide that's never been wider. We'll talk about it next on Black Issues Forum. Welcome to Black Issues Forum. I'm Deborah Holt Noel. COVID-19 has exposed a lot of cracks in our economy, in healthcare, and also in education. According to a report by the Department of Information Technology's Broadband Infrastructure Office, 95% of North Carolina households have broadband internet, and that's a statistic that looks pretty good when you compare it to conditions nationwide. But who are the seeming minority in that 5% who do not have access? And what's happening to those students while others are moving forward with virtual learning? To talk with us about these questions, I'd like to welcome Dr. Valerie Bridges, Superintendent of Edgecombe County Schools, and James Ford, member of the State Board of Education and Executive Director of the Center for Racial Equity in Education. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Dr. Bridges. In addition to being a superintendent, you have a past as a school teacher as well as a principal in both Wake and Mecklenburg counties. Can you describe for us the children and the teachers who are in your district, sort of based on socioeconomic status as well as academic performance?
Sure, thank you. So my current district is Edgecombe County Public Schools, and I'm superintendent there, proud superintendent. I'm ending my third year as superintendent. And so just a variety of staff members that have come from across the state, sometimes across the country, that are serving our students. So our teachers sometimes come with a plethora of experience, and sometimes they come as newbies, brand new teachers who are just out of college, whether it's East Carolina or North Carolina Central, or coming from out-of-state schools. So we have a range of teachers that come and serve our students. We have worked really hard at Edgecombe to assure that our teachers stay here through a tenure of time so that they can support our students, they can build relationships in the community, and so that's a big piece for us. Our students are from Edgecombe County. It's a high poverty district. We have sometimes a lot of transition in students moving from schools to schools or crossing into other counties. Again, very proud superintendent. We have 14 schools. We have about 6,000 students, a variety of races, but most of our students are African American students, Black and brown students.
Okay, so a predominantly African-American population in the Edgecombe County school systems. And James, share with us, you also have a background as an educator, matter of fact, former Teacher of the Year in Mecklenburg County, and also have a background that includes advocacy and activism on behalf of kids and public education, formerly serving with the Public School Forum and with the Governor's Committee on Teacher Education. So can you share with us, this COVID-19 has brought about a need to move to virtual learning. And we're going to get to talking about some of the challenges around that. But can you just talk about some of the great technology opportunities and broadband opportunities that are present with virtual learning?
Yeah, so I do think that North Carolina deserves a lot of credit in that in many ways we foresaw the need to engage in digital learning as recently as 5 years ago. The state, at the behest of the General Assembly, produced a broadband plan for North Carolina that looked at where all the gaps are, not just in deployment or the availability of broadband, high-speed broadband from an infrastructural standpoint, but then also the adoption, that is the subscription rates. And what they found is just as Dr. Bridges has inferred, and that is that in sparsely populated areas where there's lots of poverty, there's a huge gap in access. In addition to that, though, the North Carolina State Board of Education, along with the Friday Institute at North Carolina State University commissioned the production of a digital learning plan. And in that plan, it states that school districts ought to start working on converting to more digital learning opportunities and helping to build the human capital capacity of teachers to engage in distance learning. And so, in many ways, we were ahead of the curve. But I think what this reveals is that that mission is still yet incomplete, and that when there are real cracks, real fissures in the foundation, those are real students. And inevitably, because of how race and economics are set up in our country and in our state, those inevitably end up being Black and brown populations. And so I think that's what we're seeing today in terms of access and equity. But it's something that we're working actively on shoring up.
James, how dramatic is the gap? I mean, how serious is it? I mean, can you help our audience to understand who has this access, where they are, and just how deep the divide is when it comes to digital equity?
Sure. So, I mean, we'll just talk about basic things such as access to broadband. As I mentioned, we're ahead of our other states in the Northeast in terms of our infrastructure and the deployment. But like you mentioned, that 5% who don't have access, where are they? And so if you just look at a map, a heat map of the broadband subscription rates in North Carolina, you'll see that the counties that have the least access are Edgecombe County, Halifax County, Warren County, Northampton County, Martin, Bertie, and then if you go down southeast, you'll see that Robeson, Scotland, and Columbus County. Well, anybody who knows the state knows who predominates the population there. Those are majority Black and in some cases Native American folks in those areas. So as well as we're doing in terms of being able to put assignments online, who has devices? Who has digital literacy to even be able to know how to use these devices, to know how to get online? Who can be around to oversee their children's administration of these learning opportunities? All of that, you're going to end up getting into a bunch of social and political issues that inevitably implicate race. So we're talking about Black, Latinx, and Native American families who are the ones that aren't receiving access, and that is going to translate into huge gaps in learning in an already disruptive environment.
Dr. Bridges, can you share with us one of the things that you've said in the past is that nothing beats that face-to-face learning. When you think about the classrooms around Edgecombe County, what gets missed with digital learning? Even if a child has that device, what's getting missed there?
Sure, thank you. So of course, the face-to-face, a teacher in the classroom, a teacher interacting, nothing replaces that. A hybrid model could be okay if devices are in place. And Mr. Ford indicated there are huge gaps. Those gaps existed before COVID-19. So now it's widening, it's amplified, it's a spotlight on it. Kids feel it in a different way. But the face-to-face interaction with your teacher, your bus driver, a staff member, the front office, the principal, the assistant principal, TAs, they see students every day. They interact with them. They notice if someone's countenance is down. They notice if you're not feeling good. They notice if you're not responding or acting the same way that you normally do. You have that interaction, you have that relationship. They can pull you to the side. They can come get you early out of the class and talk to you. They can give you a bit of advice. It doesn't mean it can't happen online, but it's awfully difficult for that to happen online. You're in your location, they're in their location. It's like, whether you see someone face to face or it's a telephone call. You see someone face to face or I receive a text. It's welcome. It's the best that we can do right now. But that face to face human interaction is imperative for students and for their success. Again, we're in a pandemic, so we have to follow the rules. We have to social distance. We have to do the online and offline work with students. Our job in Edgecombe is to make sure that we interact with students. And so we've asked at every school, make sure that you're interacting with students. If there are students you've not been able to reach, then we are kind of sending a task force to say, who knows this student? Sometimes it's simply that student is not able to stay home because parents have to work. And so they may be at a relative's house that's not in Edgecombe County. So again, but we have to dig in and we have to find that information out. And so that's the nuance that you miss when you're not seeing a student day to day. Even with attendance, if we see that a student has missed a few days this month or this week, we can tap into that. We have those connections. But when you're online, you're not getting on your device. That could be a number of reasons. It could be something's going on with the internet. It could be my sibling had to use the device. Maybe a parent had to use the device that's at home, the one that's available. We haven't thought about or probably processed. There's one child in the home, there's a device. There are 5 children in the home. What does that do with the infrastructure? What does that do with the internet, with the Wi-Fi that you're using? How does that slow it down? How do we have to share and make sure we all get our work done? That's a difficult task, and especially when there may or may not be an adult who's able to be there all day with their child every day. That's highly unusual that would be the case. So lots of issues, challenges have come to us that we didn't necessarily project. We're learning along the way. We are determined that as we go through this pandemic, that when we get to the end of the year, when we begin another year, that we're not getting back to our normal. We want to be better than what we were before this started. So we're
How
learning
can that
a lot.
happen, though? How can that happen when so many kids are able to even slowly progress with virtual learning, and there's such a fallback of the students who aren't able to do this, even if it's because of broadband access? We've got teachers doing their best, but what needs to happen? And I want to direct this to you, James. What are some of the things that need to be happening right now in terms of leadership taking action to assist these kids?
Yeah, so to your original question, how is that possible? I think it's important to acknowledge, and as a public school parent with 4 children in the system and a product of public schools, that on our best day in North Carolina public schools, that many of the children we're talking about were already being underserved. And so when I hear Dr. Bridges talk about being better, I think we have to view this as an opportunity to correct what is a glaring and now exacerbated weakness in the system. COVID-19 has revealed that and has magnified that. What this forces individuals like myself on the State Board of Education, other leadership at the local level, to do is to reimagine an education system whereby those on the margins are not pushed to continue to be pushed to the periphery. Because what's clear to us is that we're only as strong as the least of these among us. And so beginning to think about how do we really enact equity? How do we ensure a system where the sorts of diligent communication between schools and families that is being exhibited right now is standard practice? How do we build an environment where one-to-one devices in the hands of young people is standard practice? It is required. How do we continue to work with internet companies to offer affordable, reliable broadband internet as essentially a civil and human right, in the same way that we expect water to be piped to homes? These are some of the infrastructural things we have to begin to think about. And if I could, even thinking about grading in this environment. What is the virtue of grades, right? Can we more take an approach that's individualized, as Dr. Bridges mentioned, blended learning, that's personalized and allows the student to develop mastery and progress at their own rate? There really is an opportunity for us here, if we take it, to think radically different about the way that we do school. It does not have to return to the status quo, because in many ways the status quo was not working to begin with.
No, there have been challenges with the way that our educational institutions are operating, and some would say all the way back to 19th century with one instructor and a classroom of folks. So there are definitely some conversations that need to be had about updating the way that we educate and using the tools that are out there. Dr. Bridges, I want to go back to you to talk about some of those ideas that are being implemented and what you all might be talking about. Specifically, one that I'd heard about is Wi-Fi on buses. Is that something that you all are doing? And if not, what are you doing to help bridge the gap on Wi-Fi connection and internet access for students?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, so with the Wi-Fi on buses, we had already implemented that. So again, to
How
our
does
point
that
about
work? How does Wi-Fi on buses work?
yeah, I'll have to ask our technology person to explain how it works. But Wi-Fi is available on the bus, and so what we do is we make sure that buses are parked in near neighborhoods, which is where schools generally are in neighborhoods, and that they households can access the Wi-Fi from their homes based on that bus. So if you're close enough, you can pick up the Wi-Fi. It still has the same parameters as it would in a school. So there's certain sites that you wouldn't be able to access. You would still be on Edgecombe County Public Schools Wi-Fi. So, you know, those blockers are there. And that's just something that's a small piece of helping. Again, we already had that set up. So the getting better is us acknowledging where we are and seeing those glaring gaps and then being able to work in this time when kids are not in the building, being able to work towards what do we want the future to look like for our students. And if we can agree and not be concerned about any kind of indictment that we weren't doing it right, we were doing what we knew. And so now we know better. And so this is an opportunity for us to come out of a pandemic and be better than we were. And that's not impossible, but it does take a focus and it takes some grit and it takes us kind of getting out of the way of ourselves and being honest and transparent that there were some pieces that weren't the way that we thought they ought to be. And so day in and day out, what we had to do is keep working because that's what you do. Now we do have an opportunity to process and to think. We don't have to be face to face to have a meeting. And so even for us, seeing some of the shortcomings for us with Wi-Fi and how do we fix that? What should it look like? What's best? Having an opportunity to reach out to students and give them a survey and ask them questions, asking parents, looking deeply at our neighborhoods, each street, and saying, who has access, who doesn't, how do we fix this? We've already generated emails to some of our representatives to say, this is an issue, this is a crisis, how can you help? It's a heavy lift. But if we know it and we acknowledge it and we are determined that each student should have equal access, then we can fix it. I just believe that if we choose to fix things for our children, then we can. Not choosing to fix it is kind of brushing it under the carpet, and eventually there becomes a large lump in the carpet, and we're going to trip over it. So we want to avoid that. This is our opportunity to do that.
And you're talking about making a choice. James, I want to key in on a couple of terms that have come up. You know, you've talked about it, internet access as a civil right, as a requirement. Another word that gets batted around out there is essential service. When it comes to making perhaps or considering internet access an essential service, what kinds of conversations are happening that you're involved in, and what kind of reception are you getting on the part of leadership that's in the position to make the decision to do that? What kind of reception are you getting from them?
Well, one thing I will say is that as I opened up, that North Carolina, prior to my arrival on the state board, was already beginning to engage in these conversations and beginning to entertain the idea of universal access to broadband. And so, you know, as I mentioned, that fire in some ways had already been lit. I think as a result of this, us on the State Board of Education, you know, are trying to embody and trying to adopt a radical imagination about how to proceed forward. You may have seen yesterday that even task force are being erected to start devising, you know, thought experiments about how we look when we open back up. But I think instantly what we have to start beginning to do is thinking about ways to partner with the private sector to make sure that these things are readily available to everyone without exception, because for every exception is a real human cost that's associated with that. And so much like Dr. Bridges, we are openly acknowledging of the fact that in many ways we haven't gotten it right, and that these decisions that we hand down in the wake of this pandemic, you know, with very little time and you know, with very careful thought, still may end up falling short. But by putting enough heads together and engaging enough stakeholders in conversations, we're hopeful that we'll build a more equitable, a more just education system. But that does require us having discussions with, you know, other departments of government and the private sector. And so that's something we're actively engaging in right now.
Dr. Bridges, do you feel like your voice and those of the leaders in your community are being heard when it comes to making the case for access and digital equity?
Sure. I do feel like our voices have been heard. We're just getting started though. So we have a lot of things that we want to share. We want to be able to express to our families that we're working on behalf of them, that we recognize the shortcomings, we recognize the issues with the infrastructure. And so again, we are just getting started. So we've sent emails, we've reached out to legislators, they have responded to us. And so again, we are just getting started. This is just the beginning of us fixing some of the things that have historically been an issue in Edgecombe County for our students. And this, again, we have an opportunity now to work on that.
And James, when it comes to state funds for education, what are some of the things that you would hope are being placed as a priority, even as we consider the impact of this pandemic?
Yeah, so one of the things the state board has already done has released $50 million at the request of the governor uh, to all the LEAs throughout the state. And, so 25 of that was based upon the average daily membership of a district or the size population. And the other 25 is prioritized based upon a low wealth calculation. So instantly, there was the understanding that in order to continue to provide essential services outside of just instructional, but nutrition services, etc., that monies had to be released into counties that don't have sort of the taxable income that someplace like Mecklenburg has. So our sites have been on trying to support districts to help bridge the gap in the interim. But I know the conversations as session opens back up about funding, meeting some of our budgetary requests, are going to prioritize equity, particularly around access to the internet, but then also quality of learning that we're constitutionally obligated to provide for all students, right? And our state constitution says that we have to do that. That's been litigated, but ultimately the language of equal opportunity is enshrined in our state constitution. So we're trying to match the funds to meet that task.
So, Dr. Bridges, I want to go back to you and just try to help us by painting a picture of what's happening in households in your district where there might not be that broadband access, where students are having to share tools. Are there, for example, enough devices for the students in your district? What's the biggest issue that you're hearing back from teachers about kind of the obstacles for virtual learning? What are some of the biggest obstacles?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So we're not having issues with devices. Those have been passed out to families. The biggest issue that we're having is the infrastructure, the internet connection. So there are students who are in locations in Edgecombe, and I know there are other locations throughout North Carolina that have this similar issues, but the infrastructure is lacking. So even if you have a device, you have a hotspot, or you have Wi-Fi connection, the infrastructure prevents you from being able to be online very long or online at all. Or if you're having to share devices with a sibling, that's an issue when the infrastructure in that area does not work. Lacking a tower, lacking enough towers to assure that students are able to get online, stay online, and get their work completed. So again, that's a problem that students can't fix. That's a problem that as a school system we can't fix. We can amplify, we can share, we can reach out to others, we can ask for support. And in the meantime, what we are having to do is provide students with offline work packets. And so again, we recognize that there's an issue. We're working on it. We're reaching out to legislators to help us with it, to acknowledge that this is an issue. How can we fix it? We don't know the timeline on that, but in the meantime, what we're doing is making sure students do have access and opportunity to complete assignments and continue learning.
When it comes to who is indeed responsible, you and your team and the educators are doing their part to make sure that the kids have the education and the connection that they need throughout this pandemic. When it comes to providing that infrastructure for internet and broadband service, where do you see the responsibility lying? There's conversations about it being municipal or on the state side. Where do you see it lying?
Yeah, so I feel like it's everyone's responsibility to help with that. And so I don't think it's just one person or one agency that needs to be responsible. I think first, we're bringing it to the attention louder than we have in the past because of a pandemic, because of a need. Once we had school closure, we had to react. And so now that we are aware, we've reacted. We have our online learning, we have offline learning. Now it's our time as not just Edgecombe County, but municipalities,
All
representatives.
over the state. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much,
Now,
Dr. Bridges. We really appreciate you being with us, Dr. Valerie Bridges of Edgecombe County. And earlier we had with us James Ford for joining us for information about today's program. Join us online at unc.tv/watchbif. For Black Issues Forum, I'm Deborah Holt Noel. Thank you for spending your time with us, and be safe out there.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.